Good evening, everybody, and welcome, and thank you for coming. I am Dr. M. Anjani Tevis. You can, of course, call me Anjani, and I am here to teach a level 1 breath class. As always, let's start with anatomy. And here it is. Here's one of my favorite pictures from Dr. Frank Netter, the great. This is a picture of the thoracic diaphragm. We're here to try to learn to breathe with as much of the body as we possibly can. And it all starts here with the thoracic diaphragm. This is a picture of the diaphragm. This is the view you would see if you were looking up at the diaphragm from below. And here we see this is muscle tissue in here. This is connective tissue. And the diaphragm is a sheet of muscle and connective tissue attached to a bony cartilaginous frame. The bottom of the sternum, the bottom of the rib cage. Here's the tip of the 12th rib right here. And you see there's a little suspension bridge from the tip of the 12th rib to the tip of the transverse process of L1. And that allows for this muscle, the quadratus, to slide underneath it. And then there's another suspension bridge from the tip of the transverse process of L1 to the front of the lumbar spine. That little bridge allows the psoas to slide underneath it. And then we see that this little suspension bridge attaches to the front of the spine, and it actually climbs down the spine. And we see yet another suspension bridge from one side of the spine to the other side of the spine. And these attachments come all the way down to L3 over here and L4 on this side. And I want to point out that these attachments that come down to L4 then come up and make this little loop around the esophagus. This actually is your lower esophageal sphincter. And then another feature I'll point out is that within the central tendon, we see a hole. That hole is for the vena cava. Oh, and something I forgot to mention is that this suspension bridge from one side of the spine to the other side of the spine allows the aorta to pass from the chest cavity into the abdominal cavity. So I want you to take a picture of this with your mind. And you might even want to go ahead and trace out these borders on your own body. Go ahead and put your fingers at the bottom of your sternum at this spot right here. So that's the bottom of my sternum. And then I can follow the edge of my rib cage all the way around. At some point, you may even be able to feel the tip of the 12th rib here near the sides, tip of the 12th rib. And then if you go straight across, your hand is going to pass over the transverse process of L1, and then you'll hit the spine. So that's the bottom border of the diaphragm, except if you leave one finger on your spine and then take your other finger on the other hand and put it on your navel. And then you are going to draw a line from your navel to the top of your hip. If you keep going around to the spine, that's going to be L4. Now, if you slide the finger that you left on your spine down to the other finger, you'll actually run your fingers over all of the lumbar segments that have diaphragmatic attachments. And I think it's a good idea to trace these borders out with your fingers, especially if this is new to you. Trace them out, trace out the borders a couple times a day, just so that you stay familiar with where your diaphragm is attached to your skeleton. Once you've built your awareness there with your fingers, then hands free, go ahead with your mind and just try to feel for those borders without actually touching them. And sorry, I just had to throw something at my dog. He's licking his paw. So This is where your diaphragm is attached. And like we said, your diaphragm is a sheet of muscle and connective tissue attached to a bony cartilaginous frame. And because it is a sheet made mostly of muscle, it can contract and it can relax. When your diaphragm is relaxed, it's shaped like a dome or a parachute. When it contracts, the muscle fibers, let me get my sleeves out of the way. When it contracts, the muscle fibers shorten. And when they shorten, the diaphragm flattens. It flattens out like a drum head. And as a result, the contents of the abdomen are going to get smushed and squish outward like an exercise ball will squish if you sit on it. Simultaneously, that flattening of your diaphragm enlarges the volume of your chest cavity. That creates a vacuum in the chest, and that's the reason air comes into the chest from the external environment, and we can call that inhalation. When your diaphragm relaxes, the muscle fibers elongate, and the internal organs will lift up underneath it and occupy space behind the rib cage. And consequently, your chest cavity gets small. And when it gets small, that drives the pressure up. And that's the reason air goes out. We call that exhalation. So your diaphragm is a pump that moves air into and out of the chest cavity from your external environment. Simultaneously, it's a pump that moves fluid into and out of your chest cavity from your internal environment. The blood that's in your veins, lymphatic fluids, even your sinus drainage is going to be drawn towards your chest cavity every time you inhale. And basically, when your diaphragm relaxes and increases the pressure on your heart, it's going to actually help squeeze blood out of the heart through the arteries. And so it contributes significantly to cardiac output. Now, I think that there's actually more that goes on here. I believe that there is a spiraling positional effect that happens during inhalation that actually contributes to cardiac output during the inhalation phase as well. But I don't believe this is well understood at this time, and so we're not going to go into it. The bottom line is that your diaphragm has a circulatory function. And in fact, your diaphragm is the primary driver of circulation in the body, far outstripping the heart's contribution. And this is both startling and awesome news for all of us. It's startling because we don't normally think about it that way. We think that the heart is the primary driver of circulation, the primary driver of fluids. But really, your heart only contributes to cardiac output. It doesn't really participate at all in fluid return, whereas your diaphragm coordinates all of the fluid return and contributes significantly to cardiac output, perhaps even dominantly, but at least significantly. And this makes sense. If you take a look at this other picture I'm about to show you, let me give you a little screen share. Okay. Is this there we go. Oops. Hold on. Where is it? There we go. Let me bring my screen share over here. This is, again, that same picture, that same Netter image that we love so well. But let's take a look now. Oops. There we go. So here's another image of the thoracic diaphragm. And this is, I like to point this one out at this point in time because you can really get a good sense of why of the reason why the diaphragm is the primary driver of circulation. If you doubted it before, you'll probably not doubt it any further. Look at the massive stroke volume of the diaphragm. It's basically all of this volume underneath this dome here. And we see that you could probably fit, I don't know, how many whole hearts could you fit underneath this diaphragm? Easily more than 4. In fact, the entire liver fits underneath the thoracic diaphragm with room to spare. How many hearts can you fit in a liver? So it makes sense, given that the diaphragm dwarfs the size of the heart itself, it makes sense that it even further dwarfs the size of the heart chambers that are inside. There's 4 little chambers in here. Relative to the stroke volume of the diaphragm, they are startlingly tiny. Now let me. And so this is awesome news for us because this, let me bring it back one more time. This is a skeletal muscle. That means it's amenable to our conscious control, unlike the heart. Unlike the heart, the diaphragm is a skeletal muscle, and so it's just waiting there for you to take charge of it. Getting more motion out of it, getting better function out of it is really just a decision away. Let me take that down. And this is fantastic news for us even more because good fluid return, or good fluid motion in general, but especially good fluid return, is good physiology. And in order for me to unpack this for you further, it's important for us to understand something about lymph. I'm going to go turn that phone off. Hang on one second. Sorry, I forgot to do that. So let's talk about lymph. Lymph is the clear fluid in the spaces between the cells. It's also called extracellular fluid. It's the fluid that you would see if you skin your knee. Now, for most of us, when we see it, or if you went into the urgent care because you got a road rash and there's a bunch of clear fluid leaking from your leg and you're not sure if that's okay, you point it out to somebody and they would say, oh, that's just lymph. Like it's no big deal. But the truth is, lymph is just as important as blood. And from one perspective, we could say that the lymph arises from the blood when the blood is passing through the capillary bed, right? The blood leaves the heart, so fluid leaves the heart in the form of blood, and it passes through arteries that get smaller and smaller and eventually finds its way into the capillary bed. Now, the capillaries are very small. They are microscopic vessels with very thin walls, semi-permeable walls. And these semi-permeable walls allow for the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen while retaining the red blood cells inside of them, because the red blood cells are big, and the particles of gas, very tiny. And it also allows for the plasma, which is the clear fluid the red blood cells are suspended in. The plasma, those molecules are also very tiny, and it allows for the leakage of the plasma into the extracellular space. When the plasma leaks into the extracellular space, we call it lymph. And lymph is what brings things to your cells that your cells want and need, like nutrients and fats and proteins. It's the means by which your immune system gets everywhere it needs to go outside of your blood vessels, which is everywhere else, which is most of the body, basically. It gets there via the lymph. And it's also the place where the cells are going to dump their metabolic waste product. It's kind of a trash can. So the longer the lymph sits in any given spot in the body, the more it becomes depleted in nutrients, because your cells are taking it up and using it, and concentrated in waste. And the more concentrated it becomes in waste, the harder it is for cells to get rid of waste, because the trash can is getting too full. And when the trash can is too full, we have a situation wherein we have where your cells are going to have to fight a concentration gradient to get rid of waste. Now, what does that mean? A gradient just basically refers to this natural tendency in nature for things to go from high to low. So a ball will like to roll down a hill. If I take this piece of paper and let it go, we don't expect it to fly to the ceiling. We expect it to go from this energy state, which is a couple feet above the ground, to resting on the ground itself, a lower energy state. And the same is true with temperature and pressure and any other condition that you can think of. And so a concentration gradient just means that things like to go from high concentrations to low concentration. So if you drop a little bit of salt in water, it doesn't stay in one spot. As soon as it hits the water, it spreads out to create the lowest concentration in the entire solution. Now, if we want to gather that salt back into one spot, we're going to have to put energy into the system. Just like if I want this piece of paper to go up high, I have to actually use energy. I have to put energy into it to take it up to a higher energy state. If I want the concentration to go from low to high, I have to put energy into the system. So if you have a high concentration of waste product in the extracellular space, your cells are going to have to use more energy, which is your energy, to get rid of that waste product. Or that waste product might accumulate within the cytoplasm. And if it does, now you have a concentration gradient inside the cytoplasm that is pushing backwards on your biochemistry, because the reactions in your body all follow the same kinds of rules with regard to going from higher energy states to lower energy states. That means it will slow down your reactions of life. It may not actually reverse them and send them in the opposite direction or stop them, but it might. But even if it slows it down, nobody needs that. Nobody needs their metabolism to slow down. Nobody needs for their cell repair to go slower, or any of their reactions of life. We want things to move in the forward direction. So it's very important to clear waste product from the tissues. And the main thing that does that is your thoracic diaphragm. When your diaphragm generates a vacuum pressure in your chest, it draws the extracellular fluid through the spaces between the cells, through the fascial planes, through lymphatic vessels. It draws those fluids from the head, from the lower body, it draws them to these two spots. One of these two spots. Here where your clavicle, your collarbone, goes into your sternum. This is the spot here where the thoracic duct is. This is where the lymph dumps back into your jugular vein. Once the lymph re-enters the bloodstream, we call it plasma again. And that plasma recirculates through the body. It recirculates through the kidney and the liver. And what you can use again will get reprocessed and recycled. What you can't use anymore gets excreted. Everything congested with lymph will be stiff, like a plant stem is stiff when it's full of fluid. It will probably be painful or at least tender, and it will always lack the kind of vitality that it could have if it were not congested, right? The healing is going to slow down, the metabolism is going to slow, everything's going to slow down in those tissues. So it's so important to clear it. Now, what I want you to do is go ahead and take some good breaths and notice where you feel most of the sensation of breathing. Most of us feel most, if not all, of the sensation of breathing on the front of the body, right here at the bottom of the rib cage, on these anterior or front borders of the diaphragm. Some of you may feel some or even most of the sensation in the upper chest on the front of the body. But let's go ahead and look at my screen share again. And let's note, and this picture, another thing I love about this picture, besides showing how huge the stroke volume of the diaphragm is, another thing I love about it is that it also shows us how most of the diaphragm is actually on the back of the body. You can see it's rather like an open stage curtain, where there's two little slips of muscle here on the front, but this whole backdrop is muscle. And actually, it goes down even further. It goes all the way down to the navel here, or at least the tendinous attachments do. But you can see that most of this muscle fiber is back here. The exact percentage, I'm not sure. My guess is it's probably at least 2/3 of your diaphragmatic muscle fibers are on the back of your body. Yet most of us feel most, if not all, of the sensation of breathing on the front of the body. And that's because we're not using the back half of the diaphragm to breathe. And if we're not using the back half of the and there's a reason. There's a reason that most of the diaphragm is on the back of the body. It's because anatomically and physiologically, that's where we need the most pumping action. All of your organs, your all of your internal organs, the organs that do that carry out the processes of your life, like your lungs and your heart and your intestines and your stomach and your liver and your kidneys, all of the organs are either on the back wall of your body or they drain to the back wall of your body. So the reason most of your diaphragm is on the back of your body is because that's where we need the most pumping action. If that's the area that needs the most compression and release in order to give proper drainage and generate forward motion of your biochemistry. Most of that is on the back of your body. So if we're not using the back half of the diaphragm, we're missing out on a lot of vitality in our lives. So now let's go ahead and now that we've gotten some background here, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about going ahead with this practice. If you have a friend or family member that you're doing this with, it's helpful to have a hand, and then you can, if they can lend you a hand to give you a little sensory feedback, then that's great. And then you can return the favor. If you don't have a friend, it's helpful to have something else that can give you sensory feedback. I think a good thing you can use is a face cloth that you fold into thirds. So you basically make a strip of cloth, kind of like this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get into a supine position, like a position where you're laying on the floor or on a bed or wherever you're comfortable, with your legs bent over a bolster or a cushion. So find a place where you can lay down with your legs over a bolster or a cushion, so that you can, so that your low back can lay flat on the floor. Now I'll give you a second to go ahead and get in that position. Now, if you don't have a friend or family, you can take that strip of cloth and put it underneath your back, and put it underneath your back where you're at the bottom of your rib cage. So between the bottom of your rib cage and the floor. If you have a friend or family member, you can ask that person to just put their hand in the same spot. And then we'll go ahead and let's go ahead and find the back border of the let's go ahead and find the back of our diaphragm. So laying in a supine position. And I'll also say it's good to not have anything underneath your head if you can. If you can't lay flat with your head flat on the floor, try to have the least amount of elevation that you can. Some people find that if they just roll up a towel, they can put it underneath their neck, and that usually will do the job for a lot of people. But try to have the least amount of elevation of your head that you can. Of course, I don't want you to strain, and I don't want your neck, restriction in your neck to force you into a hyperextended low back. I want your low back to be able to stay flat on the floor. So have as much underneath your head as you need to. in order to have your low back stay flat, comfortably flat on the floor. And now let's go ahead and begin breathing from the bottom of the pelvis up to the top of the chest and emptying from the top of the chest down to the bottom of the pelvis. Remembering that the most important instruction when you practice breathing is to let it be as easy as possible. To let it be relaxed, to let it be something that is softly expansive. Almost as if you're not really doing it yourself, as if you're just going to allow the universe to breathe through you. Like your breath is just a raft on the ocean, being lifted and lowered amongst the waves. Now, the only muscle that we have to move in order for you to get your best breath is your thoracic diaphragm, which as we said, is a sheet of muscle and connective tissue attached to the bottom of your sternum, the bottom of your rib cage, the tip of the transverse process of L1, and the front of the lumbar spine all the way down to L4. Bring your mind to the borders of the diaphragm where you know it's attached, and notice the sensations you have there as you inhale and exhale. Breathing produces changing sensations. The sensations of inhalation are the sensations of contraction. The sensations of exhalation are the sensations of relaxation. And these are sensations being generated by a skeletal muscle. So just to help us out with this for a moment, go ahead and squeeze your biceps for a second. Those are the sensations of contraction of the biceps. Now relax them. Now go ahead and squeeze your quadriceps. That's the sensation of contraction in the quadriceps. Relax them. So when you're inhaling, you're generating the sensations of contraction in your diaphragm. And like we said, most of you are feeling most of the sensations of contraction on the front of the body. Yet we know that most of our diaphragm is on the back. So what I want you to do is I want you to reach for the back of your diaphragm with your mind. Use the strap or the hand on your back as a guide for your awareness, so that you know where to direct your intention to contract. And on your next inhalation, ask those fibers to participate in generating the sensations of contraction by trying to push that strap or that hand off of your back. And notice the band of sensation that lights up across the back of your body. Now, everywhere you generated sensation, relax, 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 relax. Everywhere you generated sensation on inhalation is a place where a muscle fiber contracted. So when you exhale, use that awareness, that new awareness of muscle fiber, as a way of directing your conscious decision to relax. And try to find every fiber that you can on the back of your body and let it go. There is so much muscle fiber back there, you can relax for a long time. And then when it's time to inhale again, go ahead and push that hand or strap off your back again. Now, for most of you, this is already going to be giving you a larger breath than you're used to. In fact, probably you're generating way more pressure in your chest than you normally do, simply by asking this dormant part of your diaphragm to start to participate. And most of you probably opened your mouth to let that pressure out of your chest. Those of you that didn't open your mouth probably braced your chest a little bit. And people do this. This is a normal response. I'll say it's the common response because everybody's afraid they're going to spray the world like a leaf blower if they just let that pressure come right out of the two little holes in the face. They think, oh gosh, everything's going to blast out of my nostrils. So let's make exhalation get easier for you. I want you to imagine that you have a row of organ pipes, like you're a church organ. Imagine you have a row of organ pipes that come down the back of your head, neck, and shoulders to the level of the hand or strap that's on your back. And on your next exhalation, I want you to imagine that you could simply release the pressure in your chest directly into the atmosphere above your head through the organ pipes, bypassing the two little holes in your face almost completely. Just relax and let that pressure go right up out the top of your head and shoulders. And be amazed. Be amazed how when you do this, the breath seems to simply trickle out of the nostrils. That's because most of the pressure we feel in our chest is not air. It's fluid. It's fluid in the veins, it's fluid in the spaces between the cells, it's fluid in the lymphatic vessels. So it will never come out of your nostrils because it's not in your airways. And now that we've made exhalation easier, let's go ahead and further refine. Now that we've made exhalation easier, let's go ahead and further refine our inhalation. Now I want you to imagine you're watching a bunch of kids in a gym class, a grade school gym class, playing with a parachute. And all the kids, everybody's got a little bit of the edge of the parachute, and they're all lifting and lowering, waving their arms up and down, creating waves in that parachute. Now, if all these kids are generating waves at the same time, all the way around the parachute, those waves are going to crash into each other, and none of them are going to get very far. But if just one kid makes a wave, let's say it's you. Let's say everybody else is just holding their little bit of parachute kind of steady, with a nice soft tension and engagement, and you're the only one who makes a wave. That wave is going to travel through the entire parachute. It's going to ripple forward and it's going to touch everybody else's hands. That's because it's a natural capacity of a diaphragm to ripple. In fact, the reason that we see ripples or waves on water is because the surface tension on a body of water is a sheet of increased hydrogen bonding on the surface of the water attached to the edge of a glass or the edge of a pond or the edge of the ocean or whatever. That surface tension is a diaphragm, and that's why it ripples. So what we're going to do in our own body is take advantage of that natural capacity to ripple. What I want you to do on your next inhalation is I want you to initiate your inhalation on the strap or the hand on your back. Just start the wave there and let it go. Don't try to do anything else, but breathe into that strap and then let the breath roll forward through the chest cavity. And then from the bottom of the chest up to the top, let the wave fill your chest for you. Let the wave do the work. And don't forget to release the pressure through the organ pipes. This will generate even more pressure in your chest than before. And it'll be fascinating how easily it happens when the wave fills your chest for you. You'll generate more pressure, but even though you're generating more pressure, you can still release it through the organ pipes. Or if it makes more sense to you, imagine that you could simply let the breath go right through the back wall of your body into the atmosphere above you and behind you. You could just let it pass through you without, and again, the breath will trickle out of the nostrils, even though you're generating even more pressure than before. And relax, relax, relax. Now let's do yet one more refinement. So now we're not just going to, now we're going to, actually, we're going to do two more refinements. The first is this. Now I want you to start your breath on the spine. Try to be very specific. Try to breathe into the spinal segments that we traced with our fingers at the beginning of the class. Try to start the breath right there in the center on those spinal segments, and then let the ripple spread out from there. I think you'll notice that that produces an even cleaner experience of wave-like motion. And you may even notice that when you start it right on the center, you can feel two little beads of breath rolling around the bottom of your rib cage towards your sternum. They roll around the bottom of the rib cage, and they will actually crash into each other at the sternum, like a wave being split by a boulder at the edge of the ocean. The waves will ripple around that boulder, and they will meet each other again at the sternum. And when they do, they crash into each other and they add to each other. You will get an effortless bump in the size of your breath when they crash into each other. Just let that happen. Just watch it happen. You're not trying to force it. You're just watching for it. And let's make one further refinement to this inhalation. Let's try to start the breath on the fourth lumbar vertebra. So right behind your navel. Let's start the breath there and see if you can let it roll up your spine. See if you can let the wave roll up your spine from your fourth lumbar vertebra. At the level of L1, that wave is going to get split by the boulder again and roll around the bottom of the rib cage. But let it start at L4. And I think you'll find this produces an even cleaner experience of wave motion. And an even easier one. All you have to do is start it in one little spot. It's kind of like if you have a rope tied to a doorknob and you flick it, you can make a wave travel down that rope into the doorknob. Well, you're going to start the wave at L4 and you're going to flick it and it's going to roll up your spine. It will broaden at L1 and it will roll around the bottom of the rib cage. There are some further refinements that we're going to make in the future, but this is a great place to start in terms of bringing activity into the entire thoracic diaphragm. So now all of you should be breathing, recruiting much more diaphragm than you're used to and getting a much bigger, easier breath as a result. So now let's bring the mind inside the abdomen. I want you to bring your awareness into your abdomen. And I want you to notice the sensations of motion that you feel inside your abdomen, in your internal organs as you inhale and exhale. Breathing produces changing sensations in the organs. Inhalation feels different from exhalation. When you inhale, your organs are pressurized by the diaphragm and get pushed into the floor of the pelvis. When you exhale, it releases that pressure and the organs slide up towards your head. They slide up the back wall of the body towards your head. So just let your awareness rest in your abdomen and notice the more you allow your awareness to rest inside the abdomen, the more vivid your experience of these sensations become. And what I think you'll notice is that these sensations are very similar to the sensations you experience if you're standing in the tide. Like when we said, when a wave comes in, it pressurizes the organs and pushes them into the pelvic floor. And when the wave goes out, it draws them. You feel a sense of drawing on your organs, drawing them towards your head. Because your organs are either on the back wall of your body or tethered to the back wall of your body, they actually wave like seaweed in tide. And the more you allow your awareness to rest there, the more you can make a choice to relax more deeply with each exhalation and allow more motion to happen. And what I think you'll notice is every time you relax more deeply with each exhalation, the more breath, the more pressure you let out of your chest. And the more pressure you let out of your chest, the easier it is to get a bigger, better, more satisfying inhalation on your next breath in. And the more deeply you relax with each exhalation, the more you will feel that sense of drawing reaching deeper and deeper through your abdomen, past your navel, through your pelvis. Feel it reaching, the sense of drawing reaching all the way toward the floor of the pelvis. At some point, it's going to actually touch the pelvic floor. And when it does, you will feel a little lift in the floor of the pelvis. So every time you exhale, see if you can relax more deeply until you feel that little lift in the floor of the pelvis. It's like a slight, spontaneous, effortless little kegel. And right after it lifts, it's going to drop. Now, when you feel this little lift in the floor of the pelvis, that is actually going to be the last thing to contribute positive pressure to your chest cavity, because it lifts up your internal organs, which lift into the thoracic diaphragm, and they make your chest get a little bit smaller. When it drops, which is what it does right after it lifts, it will be the first thing to generate negative pressure in your chest cavity, or vacuum pressure, because it pulls down on the internal organs, which pull down on your thoracic diaphragm and make your chest cavity start to get bigger, start to create vacuum pressure in your chest. So now, if you feel your pelvic floor moving at the end of exhalation, the beginning of inhalation, now you're using your pelvic floor to help move air and fluid in the body. And it can do this, your pelvic floor can participate in moving air and fluid in the body because it is a diaphragm. It is the pelvic diaphragm. So it's capable of doing everything that diaphragms do. One of those things being changing the pressure gradient. So now we're breathing with 2 diaphragms instead of just 1. And that's great news, because better fluid motion is better physiology. So now let's bring our mind up to the shoulder girdle. And what I want you to notice is that when the wave comes up from the pelvis all the way up through the chest cavity, it eventually lifts the shoulder girdle. Your shoulder girdle lifts without you trying to lift it. You're not pulling up on your traps and yanking your shoulders up to get a breath. Your shoulders are being lifted for you by the wave. And then when you exhale, your shoulders drop without you trying to do that either. They're lifting and dropping, again, like a raft on the ocean. When you're feeling this motion happening in your shoulder girdle, now you're breathing with 3 diaphragms instead of 1. The shoulder girdle is also a diaphragm. And there's more refinements that we can get into with inhalation and the shoulder girdle, but this is enough for right now. Now you're feeling motion in the pelvic floor, the shoulder girdle, and the back of the diaphragm, you should be getting a much bigger breath than you're used to. So now, let's lay the tongue flat on the roof of the mouth. Let's lay the tongue flat on the roof of the mouth. Keeping your lips closed with your tongue flat on the roof of the mouth, I want you to swallow. And I want you to notice that when you swallow, that takes all the excess space out of your mouth and it creates a slight suction seal between your lips, as well as a suction seal between your tongue and the roof of the mouth and the tongue and the floor of the mouth. Just appreciate this little seal. And now on your next inhalation, what I'd like you to do is gently pull your tongue toward the back of your head by about 1 millimeter. Just a little nudge. Now, because your tongue is suctioned to the roof of your mouth, it's going to draw the roof of the mouth toward the back of your head as well. As you do this, I want you to notice the sensations this generates in the back of your head, neck, and shoulders. You should be able to feel breath come up the back of the head, neck, and shoulders when you gently engage your tongue and your palate in this way. And that's because your palate and your tongue really are both diaphragms. And so your tongue is only a diaphragm when the suction seal is in place. But when it is, both the tongue and the palate are diaphragms, so they're capable of participating in moving air and fluid in the body. Who wouldn't benefit from better fluid motion from the head? Everybody benefits. So now instead of pulling the tongue back, so instead of pulling it back toward the back of the head, let's try nudging it downward toward the floor of the mouth, but don't nudge it with such force that you break the seal. Keep the seal intact and nudge the tongue down toward the floor of your mouth, and notice that that puts a little flux in the roof of your mouth. You can feel it just bows a little bit. And now try to do that, make that little bow as you inhale. And notice that also creates a pressure gradient change in the back of the head, neck, and shoulders. So now let's go ahead and combine those two vectors. Let's pull the tongue both back and down at the same time. And what I think you'll notice is that this produces a very rich experience of pressure gradient change in the back of the head, neck, and shoulders. It also scrunches your tongue a little bit. And when you scrunch your tongue, it gets shorter and fatter. And when it gets fatter, it's going to push on the edge, on the inside of your teeth, the inside edge of your palate, and broaden your palate. And that makes you feel like you're about to start smiling. Go ahead and let yourself feel the impulse to smile as the tongue scrunches. This is just an anatomical consequence of getting a better breath. So now what I want you to do is stop trying to move your tongue. You're going to stop trying to move the tongue, and instead I want you to bring your awareness to the front of the throat and under the chin, this area on the midline in front of your throat and under your chin. And I want you to notice that when you inhale, you can feel a pulling sensation, a little tugging sensation at the front of the throat and under the chin. Feel that little pulling sensation. Now, on your next inhalation, what I'd like you to do is allow your tongue to get pulled back and down by that pulling sensation. So you don't actually have to try to move your tongue with your own effort. You can allow it to be pulled by this pulling sensation. What is this pulling sensation? Well, let's bear in mind that your tongue is rooted in the floor of your mouth, and your mouth is the opening of a tube. And if we follow that tube into your body, we will then call that tube a throat, or also a pharynx. And if we follow it further still, we'll call it an esophagus. And if we follow it further still, it becomes your stomach. But your stomach is on the other side of your diaphragm. So when your diaphragm contracts and flattens and pushes your stomach down, it's going to drag the whole food tube back and down with it. So that pulling sensation is actually being generated by your thoracic diaphragm, inducing a wave into your esophagus and pulling the whole food tube down. So the esophagus is almost like a super highway, an expressway for the breath to go right from the diaphragm to the head. And now let's bring your awareness to your lower jaw and your temporomandibular joints. Let your lower jaw be soft and relaxed without breaking your suction seal. And I want you to let that tugging sensation pull your whole lower jaw. Let that nudge your lower jaw back and down. Let it go with that tugging sensation. And when you allow this to happen, what I think you'll notice is that the floor of your mouth is going to get sucked into your head for a moment as you inhale. And when you exhale, it's going to puff back out. And when you allow this motion to happen in the floor of your mouth, you will get a more expanded experience of breath in your head. This brings breath right to the very center of the head. Who wouldn't benefit from better motion at the very center of the head, where your hypothalamus is, your pituitary gland, your pineal, all of these very important autonomic structures in the very center of your head? Who wouldn't benefit from better fluid motion, better fluid return from the center of your head? Everybody benefits. The floor of the mouth is obviously a diaphragm, a sheet of muscle and connective tissue attached to the bottom of the mandible and the hyoid bone. This is the most important diaphragm in the head, or at least I think it is so far. I might find something else out in the future, but for now, this is, in my estimate, the most important diaphragm in your head. And in order for it to come online, you must breathe in and out through the nose. And now let's bring your awareness to the roof of the nasal cavity. Let's bring your mind to the roof of the nasal cavity. It's just between your eyes, but a little bit below your eyes. Bring your mind there. And on your next inhalation, what I want you to do is I want you to let that area be very soft and relaxed, and notice that when you inhale, that area feels like it is being drawn down by your inhalation. And when you exhale, that area floats back up to its original position. And when you allow this motion to happen in the roof of your nasal cavity, you'll feel a flood of cooling illumination. Whenever you bring breath to an area, it cools it off. It makes it cooler in temperature. So when the roof of your nasal cavity is engaged by motion in your thoracic diaphragm, you'll feel a flood of cooling illumination right through the midline of the body, between the two hemispheres, the corpus callosum. Feel it go all the way down your spine to the pelvic floor itself. Feel this motion happening, flooding the entire midline of your body through your torso. For those of you who've been affected by COVID and have lost your sense of smell and taste, I really believe that that's probably because these areas have become so congested as a result of the inflammatory process that happens during a COVID infection. And the more you can allow these diaphragms to participate in breathing, I believe that it will help you get your sense of smell and taste back faster. It will help those tissues heal. It will help with the cell repair. It will help clear out the waste product so that they can again have vitality. So let these diaphragms in the center of the head move, the floor of the mouth, the tongue, the roof of the mouth, and the roof of the nasal cavity. And let your head cool right off. And now let's bring your awareness to your cheeks. The sheet of muscle, skin, and fascia that's attached to your mandible, your zygoma, and your maxilla. And what I want you to notice is that when you inhale, your cheeks will hug your teeth for a moment. And when you exhale, they release your teeth. And when you allow this little bit of motion to happen in your cheeks, it's going to feel as though you can breathe right through your face, and your whole cheeks, both of your cheeks will cool off, and it will feel like you can breathe right through them. Like you don't have to get all of the breath in through the two little holes in your face. Like you can bring it in right through the surface of the skin, like cutaneous respiration, which is something that I remember when I first learned about it. It was something I always wanted to develop in my life. So now let's go ahead and bring our awareness to the nose flaps, the little triangles on each side of the bridge of your nose. And I want you to let them be soft and relaxed. And I want you to notice that when you let them be relaxed, they will be drawn to the midline. They'll both be drawn to the midline as you inhale, and they'll both puff back out as you exhale. And when you allow this little motion to happen in your nose flaps, it will feel like you can breathe right through the footprint of your nose. And the breath just gets bigger and bigger. And now let's bring your awareness let's bring your awareness into your ear canals. Please follow your ear canals with your mind to their medial ends. This is where your eardrum is located. Your eardrum, just like any drum, is also a diaphragm. So let that area where you know your eardrums are, let that area be soft and relaxed, and notice that when you inhale, your eardrums are drawn to the midline with inhalation, and when you exhale, they puff back out. And when you allow this slight motion to happen in your eardrums, you can feel your whole temporal lobe. This area here behind your ear, you can feel it cool right off on both sides. And now let's bring the mind to the temples, what we call the temples, this area here, just lateral to the eyes. And I want you to let this area get drawn into the midline with inhalation. And when you exhale, let it puff back out. And when you allow this motion to happen in your temples, it's going to feel like you can breathe right through them. And when you do, it'll feel like you can cool off your entire frontal lobe on both sides. Now, if your eyes are open, go ahead and close them. I'll close mine. Bring your awareness into your eyelids. And when you inhale, notice that your eyelids get pulled in with your inhalation, and when you exhale, they puff back out. And when you allow this little motion to happen in the eyelids, you'll feel the entire area around your eyes cooling off. But let's do more. Let's now go ahead and bring your awareness to your eyeballs. See if you can feel for your eyeballs in their bony eyeball sockets. See if you can feel your eyeballs, feel the space between your eyeballs, and then feel for the socket. And when you inhale, notice that your eyeballs get drawn toward the back of your head as you inhale. And when you exhale, they slide back forward. And when you hear and when you feel this little motion happen in your eyeballs, feel your whole eyeball cool off. In fact, you may even notice that the whole eyeball gets cooled off it's almost like a plane of cooling illumination, perpendicular to the one produced by the roof of the nasal cavity. Another plane of cooling illumination happens from the eyeballs straight to the back of the head. Let that happen. And this is a great start for getting things moving in the head. By now, you should feel that every time you inhale, your head expands like a balloon in all directions. In fact, let's notice something that might be a little more subtle. Let's notice that it's almost the very moment that your breath launches off of L4, that drawing sensations happens at the front of your throat. It starts almost immediately as soon as you start to inhale. That's because the muscle fibers that have tendinous attachments at L4 are the ones that wrap around your esophagus. So the very first action of the diaphragm when you launch it off of L4 is to close off the esophagus and engage the food tube. So that means that you can start to fill your head with breath the moment that pulling sensation starts. So be ready. Be ready with enthusiasm to allow your head to start to fill with breath the moment the breath leaves for L4. Your head and your chest and your torso will actually fill simultaneously. And because there are more than 20 diaphragms in your head, we didn't get to all of them, but because there are more than 20 diaphragms in your head, and your head is smaller than your torso, your head will actually fill with breath before the breath gets to the top of the chest. And when it becomes full of breath, it actually overflows, and the breath will flow down. There'll be a little wave of pressure that flows down from the head through the neck like a vase, like a gravity-defying vase that fills with fluid and then overflows. And it's going to flow back down through your neck, and it's going to come into your shoulder girdle at the same time that the wave coming up from the bottom of the pelvis to the top of the chest gets to the shoulder girdle. When those two waves meet each other, they will add to each other and expand your shoulder girdle in all directions. Let that expansion happen. For most of us, we'll feel that expansion, the the place we're going to feel that is primarily in the back of the shoulder girdle. And most of us, myself included, really need that expansion because so many of us have a lot of residual pressure and tension in the back of the shoulder girdle. And we can naturally start to move that congestion and tension by simply allowing the head to fill with breath, overflow, and crash into the wave coming up from the bottom of the pelvis to the top of the chest. So now we should feel that our whole torso and head are expanding in all directions at the same time. So now, what I want you to do next, on your next inhalation, I want you to lift your toes on both feet. I want you to reach down through the balls of your feet, lift your toes, flex at your ankles, squeeze all the muscles of your lower extremities, all the way up to your butt cheeks as you inhale. And I want you to notice how big, how monstrously large your breath gets when you add 6 more diaphragms to your breathing apparatus. The arches of the feet, the back of the knees, and the thigh pits, all of these structures are diaphragms, and they can all participate in moving air and fluid in the body. When you exhale, relax everything. Right back down through your toes. And then on the next inhale, lift the toes again. Fill the legs, fill the whole body, fill the head with pressure. And when you exhale, let that pressure all the way out through the feet. Now let's add the upper extremities. What I want you to do on your next inhalation is you're going to spread your fingers and your palms, and you're going to make a little dish shape out of your palm. I don't want you to bend your fingers backwards. That's hyperextension. And we want to avoid hyperextension as much as possible. So when you inhale, you're going to spread the fingers and the palms, make a little dish shape with them, and you're going to squeeze all the muscles, the front and the back of the arms, all the way up to the armpits, including every muscle around your armpit. Especially most people, what they fail to engage is the latissimus, which the lats here at the back of the armpit. When you engage them, what you'll find is that you make a little egg shape inside your armpits. So on your next inhalation, spread the fingers and the palms, squeeze all the muscles of the upper extremity up to and including the lats on both sides, at the same time that you're doing that with your legs. And notice how enormous your breath becomes when you add yet another 6 diaphragms, the palms, the antecubital space or the elbow crease area, and the axilla on both sides. So now your whole body should be expanding just a little bit with every inhalation in all directions and collapsing and retracting on exhalation. And this is just a tiny little bit, maybe it's a millimeter of expansion in all directions. But there's a superpower in this little bit of expansion and collapse. I promise we won't get to it today, but there's a superpower here. So now, what I want you to do is I want you to alternate sides with the arms and legs. I want you to engage the arm and leg on the right side of the body as you inhale, and then relax it as you exhale. Then I want you to go to the other side of the body and engage the arm and the leg on the left side of the body as you inhale, and then relax it as you exhale. And what I think you'll notice is that one side of the body will get a little bit longer and fatter than the other. And you may even notice that a larger volume of air is going to pass through the nostril of the side of the body that you're engaging. Because now you are actually being more specific, you're actually having even more control over how much, over what parts of your diaphragm that you're engaging. Take a few more breaths like this. And then I want you to go back to just using the thoracic diaphragm to generate all the motion. Relax the volitional effort in your arms and legs. And bring your awareness to your armpits. And I want you to notice that at the end of your exhalation, you're still recruiting all the diaphragms in the torso and the head, but only your thoracic diaphragm is really trying. That's the only place where you're trying to do something, and you're trying to do it on inhalation. So you're going to engage the thoracic diaphragm on inhalation, and then relax, relax, relax it with your awareness in your armpits. And I think what you'll notice is at the end of that deep exhalation, your armpits will be drawn into your body like little jellyfish swimming into your torso. That's because we've cleared away some of the congestion, the stiffness in the tissues, and now those tissues are being drawn in to motion. You don't have to try to recruit them. You just need to keep them clear enough so that they can be drawn in by the motion of the thoracic diaphragm. And you can go ahead and rotate your awareness now into your elbows and your palms, into your thigh pits, your knees, even the arches of your feet. And I think you might notice that there is a slight undulating disc shape of sensation in all of these structures that changes with inhalation and exhalation. Now you are able to breathe with your whole body. And the only thing that you're really trying to do is start that breath on the back of the diaphragm and let it travel through the whole system. Now, this is a great start, and I think we'll stop here for tonight. But this was a great start, and I have time for a couple of questions. If you want, you can, when you're ready, wiggle your fingers and toes, kick the bolster out from underneath your legs, and come to a seated position. If you have a couple of questions, I can try to answer those. But what we've done so far today will give us a great place to move forward in future guided meditations. We can add, there's more diaphragms that I didn't get to tonight, and I will probably get to them and I have in previous meditations that are on YouTube. And it also gives us a great place to start for the level 2 breath class that will happen in 2 weeks. So, like I said, please go ahead and return to a seated posture. But by all means, continue to practice breathing as you do. And I guess this is a good place to end the recording.